Hey guys, I have been a challenger player for the last 4 sets, and with set 8.5 dropping tomorrow, I have released a new guide like always on what I think the strongest early game boards you should look towards playing are. So like always in this Google Doc, I have a list of examples and units that I think you should hold early game because they are the core units of the early game boards that are extremely powerful that you should look towards playing. In the rest of this video, I'm going to go a bit more in depth on how I think you should play these early game boards and what these boards actually look like. Without further ado, let's get right into the guide. One of the strongest early game openers you could play in set 8.5 is going to be around Duelists. There are 2 main variants you could play. The first variant is going to be either around Nyla or Vayne. You want to play this variant if you get either Nyla or Vayne from an early orb. If you're playing around Nyla, you almost always want to be playing around Rel because the Star Guardian breakpoint is now at 2 instead of 3 in set 8.5. And Nyla just synergizes really well with Rel because she ends up healing 2 defenders, which is really tanky. This variant plays a lot easier into a level 8 comp because Duelist's main weakness is frontline, and in this variant you actually have all the frontline you need, so you could easily pivot into Jhin or Samira. The other variant is not around the 3-cost Duelist, but rather around a 2-star Kayle or a 2-star Gangplank. In this variant, you usually want to play the Vertical Duelist variant because you don't have the established frontline, and this variant pretty much is only playable if you get a Locket early because that fixes your frontline problem. In this variant, you usually have to roll at level 6 or 7 to stabilize because this is a tempo comp, and then you cap out at 6 or 8 Duelist late game and play for top 4. So next up is going to be Underground. Underground is really strong if you get it at stage 2-1, but if you get it at stage 2-5 or later, you probably don't want to consider playing this just because you're going to be too behind in unlocking your heists. Generally, most of the time if you're playing around Underground early game, you usually want to be looking towards playing Samira just because Samira is an Underground unit herself. Kayle is a really good item holder for Samira, and Underground is usually one of the only reliable ways to get you to level 8 to actually even play Samira. One really good thing about Underground as well is because one of the Samira augments, Daredevil, makes you a lot stronger when you're lower HP, and Underground just has a really easy transition into that hero augment because you're going to be at 1 HP for most of the game anyway, and it will guarantee that you will stabilize if you hit that hero augment. So the game plan for Underground is you just sack early game. You don't want a full sack, you want to try to kill off as many units as possible while maintaining your loose streak. And then if you see a double gold cash out for heist 1, you can cash out. Otherwise, you just go for the heist 3 cash out, go level 8 at 4-2 and play around Samira. Another good opener you can play is going to be INFINITEAM. So INFINITEAM is a pretty good early game trait just because it gives you an extra unit. The early game units for that trait are actually pretty good as well. For example, hitting a 2-star Pantheon or a 2-star Lucian early is good enough to just put on any board because the unit is pretty strong. A sample early game board might look something like this, and you have the option of itemizing either your Lucian or your Sivir. If you itemize your Lucian, you generally want to itemize him with attack speed and AP items like Shiv or Guinsoo's. Lucian also is a blue buff holder, so it gives you the option of playing into the set 8.5 late game blue buff units as well, like Vex, LeBlanc, and Sona. You also have the option of playing around your Sivir with AD items. So if you play around Sivir, the easiest transition is going to be into Jhin because Lucian is already a renegade and Jhin is a late game renegade unit, so all you have to do is swap this unit out for Jhin and transfer over the items. So next up is going to be LASERCORPS. Here is a sample early game LASERCORPS board. You have 2 options. You can play around the Duelist with Yasuo by playing around a Nyla as your frontline, or you could play around 2 SURESHOTs instead. However, I think the Duelist variant is a bit stronger just because you already have so much damage from the LASERCORPS, and SureShot early game takes a bit too long to scale. So I just rather have the extra frontline and play around a Nyla as my 3rd frontline unit, and it is synergized really well with my Yasuo. So for LASERCORPS, it's strong not only because of the trait, but because of the units itself. Just hitting a random 2-star Renekton or a 2-star Ashe is going to be really good for your board. And for itemization, you have 2 options of who you want to itemize. You could itemize the Ashe. Ashe does pretty well with LASERCORPS with Shiv and Guinsoo's. And if you're playing around that variant and you already have the 2 Duelists on your board, it is a pretty easy transition into TF because TF is going to be a late game Duelist that uses Shiv and Guinsoo's really well. Alternatively, if you're playing around the Sivir, you could just play tempo. You should only itemize your Sivir if you hit Sivir 2-star. Otherwise, it's easier to hit the Ashe 2-star, so you want to itemize the Ashe instead. And then you just tempo into level 8 and play around a random level 8 AD comp like Jhin or Bel'Veth or Samira. So next up is going to be KAISA. If you get an early game KAISA, your early game is always going to be really strong just because KAISA herself is a pretty strong unit. So remember, in set 8.5, Star Guardian is going to be a 2 breakpoint trait now. So KAISA synergizes really well with 2 defenders early because Rel is a defender. So KAISA is also a quick draw unit. Recon is gone in set 8.5, and the quick draw units you want to look out for are going to be Ezreal, Lucian, and Misfortune. So this is a really good level 4 sample board early. I am not too sure if reroll KAISA works anymore just because Recon is gone. So I think that the way to play KAISA is you want to tempo into level 7 or 8. And then you probably either want to play into TF because TF shares the exact same itemization as KAISA, or you want to play it into MF because MF is also a quick draw unit and she also uses AP. Next up is going to be Vex. So Vex is just another really strong AP unit that you play around early, similar to KAISA. It's just going to be Vex plus frontline. So in this variant, I'm playing around 2 Brawlers plus Lee Sin for Heart. In the other variant, I'm playing around 2 defenders. And finally, in my third variant, I'm just going to be playing around Supers because Supers has a mascot like Malphite, and Vex is also a mascot. Next up is Anima Squad. So Anima Squad, you only want to play around this trait if you hit it really early at stage 2-1 because this trait is extremely reliant on farming fame early game. If you don't get that early game fame, you're most likely going to lose a lot of fights early in mid game that you would have won if you hit Anima Squad at stage 2-1, which will enable you to farm even more fame and scale you into late game to play around MF. So for example, even if I had 3 Anima Squad early, if I had a 1-star Jinx, 1-star Nasus, and a 1-star Sylas, and no AP items, I probably would reconsider playing around this trait because I'm not going to be killing shit. However, if you get like an early game Riven or something, that will strengthen your frontline enough to be able to kill some units, and you will be able to kill units with a board like this. Later on, because you're itemizing around your Jinx, you want to play into MF, move all your items to MF at level 7 or 8, depending on when you roll. You also have an option of itemizing your Vayne instead. So if you're playing on the Vayne, you want to be playing around the second Duelist instead. And that opens you up to playing around SURESHOT. So next up is going to be Brawlers. So Brawlers is going to be mainly a tempo comp. There are a few ways to play the Brawler early game. One way is going to be playing around Brawler LASERCORPS, where you itemize your Ashe with either attack speed / AP or full AD items. So if you go the attack speed route, you could play into Jax by rolling down at stage 3-2 at level 6 for a full 6 Brawler board and moving over your items to Jax. You could also just play tempo and then at level 7 or 8 move the items around to Warwick instead, and because you're already playing around 2 Brawlers, it's going to be a pretty easy transition. The other variant is if you get dropped the Jax early, in which case you could just straight up continue itemizing your Jax right from the get-go. And then at level 6, you roll down for a 6 Brawler board to stabilize, and eventually you can consider dual carrying your Warwick as well at level 7 or 8. So the last opener I'll be discussing is going to be the Gadgeteen opener. So there are a few conditions you should consider when playing the Gadgeteen opener. If you get an early game Gnar, you should consider playing it. If you get a 2-star Poppy and a 2-star Lulu, you should consider playing it just because you have a lot of 2-star units. Or if you get a Gadgeteen Crest or Prankster Crest. This is because having a Gadgeteen Crest will allow you to hit 5 Gadgeteen mid-game and will give you the new win con late game, which is really, really powerful. And a Prankster Crest early game will allow you to play 3 Prankster early, and the extra target dummies will just give you so much more HP on your board that you would just win streak until stage 4 or 5, guaranteeing you the top 4. So this sums up my early game guide. So all of this info was based off of PBE. I'm sure in a couple of weeks this might get outdated and I might release an updated one for you guys to follow. If you guys enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you guys considered subscribing to my channel or follow me on Twitch. And stay tuned for my first flex guide of set 8.5 in 2 days. I'll be releasing that after I grind on the live patch for 20 or 30 games, so I get an updated view of what the current meta is actually like. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.